Hello buzzers, John here. Wanted to cover a little tip really in this video about using a particular Photoshop tool, but I'll explain why it can be useful to you, and that's in the realm of product photography. Now what we're looking at the moment is a very poor pack shot, a lousy example of product photography. Now I took this on my phone, and it's the kind of thing you see on auction sites like eBay and whatnot all the time. Terrible shots taken kind of one-handed from the hip. Just an example of the particular product. And this kind of shot is not going to fetch a decent price because it looks terrible, it looks uncared for, simply because it's a bad example of photography. But with shots like this, there's a particular tool that can help you turn it into something a bit more special. So this very same shot could look like this instead. And in design and pack shot lingo, this is referred to generally as a whiteout. And what that means, it's effectively a cutout on a white background. Sometimes you can shoot these in situ if you set up your lighting properly to get the right shadow and all sorts of things, but there is a way of making these kind of shots in Photoshop. So you can have a terrible starting point like that, and you can turn it into something a bit more special that's going to fetch a better price and show off the product in a better light than our first example. So to do this kind of thing, what you need to do is make a selection. So let's just get rid of the polished version and go back to our wonky original. So what we'd need to do is make a selection around the subject itself, cut it out, and then put it onto a new background. And to do this, there are various tools on option. You'll find this one here, the lasso tool. That's frequently used for general cutouts, but if we try to use that to sort of, chop around the edge, we're never going to get an accurate selection, so that's no good at all. So we can't use the lasso tool for this kind of example. The other one is a friend of the lasso tool, which is the polygonal lasso tool, and that can help because if we zoom in, we can kind of click around the edge and we can sort of, make up our selection by clicking along and hopefully get something decent. I'll just hold down the spacebar to scroll along, and we can click point to point and make a selection. Now that can work, but it's quite slow and you get these irregular angles. And the terrible thing about the lasso tool, if you double click when you're frantically trying to click around the edge of something, you complete the selection. And then if you try and move back a step by hitting Control or Command and Z, you lose the whole thing. So double clicking is a real no-no if you're using the polygonal lasso tool. So the tool of choice for this kind of work, for illustrators, designers, and more advanced photographers, is this one here, the pen tool. Now this is an illustrator's tool or a designer's tool, and it works by vectors. It allows you to draw lines and curves by simply using your mouse and using the modifier keys, which are Control or Command, Alt and Shift. Now to use it, the first thing you've got to do is make sure it's set up correctly for drawing paths. So once you've selected the pen tool, go up to the options bar at the top of the screen here and make sure that it's set to path. You don't want it set to shape. Have it set to path. And that's all you need to do. So make sure the pen tool's selected and it's set to path up in the options bar. Once you've done that, you can then click on the edge and you'd lay down an anchor point. You can then click on another anchor point and you can use it in this kind of point-to-point fashion, just like the polygonal lasso tool. But if you do double click, it's not going to do anything. It's not going to complete the selection. So that's one way of using it, but that isn't the way of using it. And a trick that most photographers don't know about is how you can use it to make curves. So let me just backtrack. I'm just going to Control Z, Command Z, those things, so I get back to no points at all. So what you do is you click right on the edge. So let's make an anchor point there. And then for your next anchor point, you can go quite a way away from that. And we'll set that right on the edge as well. And then you end up with a line joining the two together. And what you do then is drag. So I haven't let go of the mouse, but if you drag, you can actually form a curve. And by wangling your mouse about, you form a curve and you make sure that curve corresponds to the edge of the subject. So this is how we cut out curved surfaces with beautiful smooth Bezier curves. And what you end up with are two control handles. These are these bits here, these floating handles that come out from the pen tool after you've dragged out from laying down an anchor point. And these can be adjusted to suit whatever you do next. So my next point is going to be sort of here. So if I click there, we get the wrong kind of curve. But if I just make some control handles, I can then hold down the Alt key and adjust this anchor point to get it so it's right. So we get that along the line. That's good. Then the next one would be about here, just in the corner angle. That's not quite right, but holding down the Alt key, I can adjust them. I haven't let go of the mouse at any of these points, so we can adjust our curves to really make things work quite nicely. And then we click around the subject, you click and drag every time, so you lay down a curved anchor point. When you get to a corner point though, one where the line changes direction, you just click. But then all others you click and drag a little bit to get those little control handles. And if I quickly whiz around this subject, I've got some straight lines now, and then spacebar to scroll around the image. We can get down to here, and then we've got a curve again, so we drag out the curve and run down the edge, and that's the sort of thing. So I'm just clicking and dragging, making a little curve each time, following the direction of travel with the pen tool. When I've got straight lines, I can just click like you're using a point-to-point polygonal lasso tool. But for these kind of things, we can actually click around another curve here. So let's just click that, drag it out a bit more of a curve. So we go right on the edge, and then we pull out the curve just to make it fit the line. That's the kind of thing. It's always going to be a tangent to the curve you're on. And then we click here for an anchor point. That hasn't quite worked, so we hold down the Alt key and move that control handle in to make it line up and fit the edge. Okay, let's scroll down. Let's just whiz down to this bit of a curve here, and then to this point. And then I'm just going to whiz around the bottom. I'm not going to chop out all of these bits on the rear lens cap. So let's just get that curve in roughly the right place. I need a bit of Alt key here, so Alt key, and we just adjust that line. That's the kind of thing. Add Alt key again to adjust that line. Now we just need to pull out this control handle just to get that curve in the right sort of place. That's not quite working, so what we're going to do is just add an extra point, and we can just click on the line to add a new point, and then by holding the Command key this time, we can pull that into shape. So Command key moves the anchor point, and the Alt key adjusts the control handles either side of the anchor point. So we can just trim that in. There we go. We've got a nice smooth curve following the outline of the subject. This one's wrong here. You can just see that. So let's get hold of that anchor point and just bring that down. There we go. And that's just about right there. Okay, we'll scroll around. We'll just lay down another anchor point. Make sure the curve fits. That looks about right there. And then to this point here, just on the edge, just on the corner point. And then we'll change direction. So what we'll do is hold down the Alt key and take that line up. And then to this corner. And then we'll quickly whiz round the rest of the subject. I'll go in the middle here to get a nice curve. Then we've got some straight lines. So I'm just clicking without using the modifier keys. And we'll go around this bit here. Something like that. Just clicking away. And before long, we should hopefully return to our starting point. Now I've just got to get up this side of the lens, so we'll go there, have a little bit of a curve here, up to there, then along this edge. We've got quite a long straight bit there, so that's all good. There we go, into there. So you see we're just clicking and dragging whenever we have a curved angle to follow, and we're just clicking when we have a straight line. And we can use the modifier keys, the Alt key when we want to change control handles, and we use the Control key or the Command key if you want to move a particular anchor point. So we're nearly there now, so we'll just go up here, little bit of a curve by dragging the mouse, this bit here. Got to make sure I'm on the edge here with that nasty background I've got. Couple more curves, and there's my closing point, and that shuts off the selection. I'll just drag that out, get a little bit of a curve in there. Okay, so I've now made what's called a path all the way around the outside of the subject, all using the pen tool and using Bezier curves by dragging the mouse when I lay down an anchor point. Now once I've got to this stage and I've got my path around the subject, all I've got to do is right click or control click anywhere in the image, and then I can choose Make Selection from the menu. A box will come up, and we want a really accurate selection, so in feather radius I'm going to put 0.5 pixel, so there's barely any feathering at all. So we click OK to that, and we now have the familiar sight of selection lines around the subject. Now we can't do anything else without having our layers panel up on screen, so we go up to Window and choose Layers if that's not already there, and then we see our background layer. That's our shot straight out of an iPhone with our background layer. What we want to do is punch this particular selection we've made into a new layer now. So it's separated from the background it's on. And all we're going to do is hit Control or Command and J. And what that does, that gives us that layer 1 floating in its own space. So this checkerboard area, this is a transparency now. So now we have our layer 1, our lens, floating in space. The background itself, I'm going to leave it there, but you could get rid of it at this stage just by dragging it to the trash, because what we need is a new background. And we want just a white sheet of paper. We want a white out here, so we just want something nice and clean and white. So we're going to create a new layer. There it is there. That's layer 2, and we want this to be filled with white. A good trick for filling quickly with white is to hit D on the keyboard. That resets your foreground and background colors to black and white. And then we're going to hold down the Command key or the Control key on a PC and hit Backspace or Delete. And that flood fills that new layer with white. Now at the moment, our new layer is above the lens layer. So we need to just grab hold of that and drag it underneath the lens so that the lens is sitting on top of the new layer, our white layer. Now that's done, we could do with a little bit of transforming on this. We need to square this up and straighten it because it needs a bit of rotation just so it's sitting straight. It's kind of on the wonk at the moment. So we'll go back to that layer, that's the one we need to change, and we'll just hit Control or Command and T to go into the transform mode. Now this allows us to rotate the image or do anything we like with it. We can do what we like with it once we've got the transform bounding box up. So let's get it square and true, and then we've got a little bit of flaring where this has been taken at the wrong angle. So I'm just going to hold down the Command key or the Control key on a PC and just pull out those bottom corner handles to get it nice and straight and looking true. That's the sort of thing there. That looks about right, I think. Now I've done that, I'll just move it into position. Let's put it in the middle of the frame. Double click inside that transform bounding box. And now we have a pretty clean looking cutout. The only thing we don't have though is a shadow to kind of connect it to the ground. And there are various ways of making a shadow, but what you always want to do with creating a shadow is put it on a separate layer. So let's make another new layer. We'll just click on the Create a New Layer icon, and that gives us a blank layer. Here it is at the top of the stack. We need this to be our shadow, so let's just call it Shadow. And that's just by double clicking where it said layer 3 and you just type in the name. So that's our shadow layer, and we need that to sit between the subject and the background. So we drag it down so it's underneath. So now we've got our subject, then we've got our shadow layer, and then we've got layer 2. So how do we make this shadow? Well, there are all sorts of ways of doing it, but a really simple way is simply to make a selection of the kind of the shadow area. So we could grab the regular lasso tool and we're just going to draw a vague selection around where the shadow should be, and it should be kind of sort of around here, something like that. I've got a terrible kink in that. Look at the state of that. Let's do that again. Let's just go round here, try and get a vaguely smooth line. That'll probably do. Something like that should be okay. So that's our shadow, believe it or not, and we're going to plonk that on this layer. Now shadows, we just want that to be black. And just as we saw by flood filling with white, we used Control or Command and Backspace or Delete. We can do the same thing with black, but with the other modifier key. So we hold down the Alt key in this instance and hit Backspace, and that will fill that shadow with black. Now we can get rid of our selection line, so that's Control or Command and D. And what we have is a very hard-edged, lousy shadow that isn't looking very convincing at all. So what we really want to do is just blur that shadow. So we need to run a blur filter on this shadow layer. It's still selected, that's the bit we're working on. So we go up to Filter, go down to Blur, and across to Gaussian Blur. And we need to just adjust that so it looks about right. Now that's too hard, just get a nice soft edge, and I think that's too much there. Something like that will probably do. So I've got kind of 90 pixels in this example. We'll click OK to that blur, and then we can adjust the opacity of that shadow layer just by using the opacity slider once that layer is active and selected. So going to 0 gives us no shadow at all, but we can gradually build it up. And I think if we go for about kind of 70 odd %, something around that, that should be okay. Then we need to thicken the shadow where it joins. So we could either draw another one, or we can simply duplicate that one and pull it about a bit. So we'll hit Control or Command and J, and that will duplicate the shadow. And then we're going to hit Control or Command and T to go into transform mode. And while holding the control key, we can just kind of adjust that shadow and just change the shape of it a little bit. This is our grounding shadow, our initial shadow, which is the bit that follows the outline and really kind of fixes the shadow in place and makes it join. So something like that should be okay. I'll double click there. So we've got 2 shadow layers, 1 and 2, and that looks fairly reasonable now. We've got this white edge which I'll need to just clean up, and I could just use the eraser tool on that. So if we go back to our subject, we'll zoom in tight, and I'll just grab the eraser, a nice small brush. I'll just use the left square brackets key to take down the brush size, and we'll just nibble away at that edge just to clean it up. Remember, this is only going on eBay, so it's going to be a low resolution picture, so we don't have to go too mad about getting it absolutely spot on and super accurate. So we'll just get rid of that fringe that we've left because I didn't really follow the pen tool in the most accurate way for a high res cutout. So we just get along there. That's the sort of thing. So I'm nibbling away at it by just clicking the mouse with a small brush and removing any trace of that dodgy white edge that I've got along the bottom of the rear lens cap in this example. So let's just take that out. Just get up to the edge, and I think that will probably do us. That should do the trick okay. Yeah, a little bit dodgy, but rough and ready is fine in this kind of thing. So let's zoom back out and see what we've got. Now I've got that nasty kink in the shadow just here, which isn't looking very good. So I'll quickly show you another way. We've done the hand-drawn shadow here, but there is another way which will exactly follow the contours of the subject. So let's get rid of those shadows for the time being. Let's just drag them to the trash. There we go. We've got rid of our shadow layers. Now what we're going to do is make a new one, but we're going to use the shape of the subject to create that shadow. So let's see how we can do this. What we need is the shape of the subject as a selection. And to do that is nice and easy. The Control or Command key, hold that down and then click on the layer thumbnail. Click once and you reselect whatever's on that layer. So we now have the outline of the subject. So we need a new layer. Remember, the shadow's always got to be on a new layer. So we create a new layer and then we need to drag it down so it's between the subject and the background. So we'll write in again, shadow, so we remind ourselves that that's what it is. And then with that selection active, we can fill that whole shape with black. Remember, the shortcut for that was Alt and Backspace, and we now have this black shadow layer. There it is there. It's just the outline of the subject, a silhouette of the lens effectively, filled with black, and we've plonked that into the shadow layer. So what we now need to do is blur that, and that should give us a much more accurate representation of the lines of the subject. So let's get rid of our marching ants first of all. That's Control or Command and D to get rid of the selection lines, and then we'll just run that blur filter again. So we'll go to Filter, Gaussian Blur. The last time we used it is up at the top of the filter list. So click on that and we should get about the same kind of shadow. Yeah, that looks good. Now we can move it into position, so we simply use the Move tool up here in the toolbox and we can drag that so it's in roughly the right place. And that looks okay there. So that's following the contours of the subject quite nicely now. And I think what we'll do is just broaden out the shadow just a touch, because remember, we've blurred the edge of it, so we need to make it a little bit bigger. So we can use Transform for that, which is Control or Command and T. Then we hold down the Shift key, just pull out those edges there, and that should do the trick nicely. Now what we need to do is get rid of the shadow that's not grounded. So once we've double clicked inside the Transform bounding box, all we can do is pick up something simple like the eraser tool. We use a big brush with a nice soft edge. That's the sort of thing. Then we can just get rid of the shadow wherever we don't want it. So we don't want it around this part here. We just want to concentrate more on the base of the lens. That's the kind of thing. We just paint around there, get rid of that bit of shadow, nibble away at it so it looks nice and smooth. That looks about right there, doesn't it? Get a little bit out here. There we go. So now we've got a bit of top lighting looking quite nice. The shadow helps the subject connect to the ground. And if we zoom back, that doesn't look bad at all. We have still got our original shot down the bottom here, so let's get rid of those. So there's our terrible starting shot, but then what we've got above it, there's our background. There's our pure white sheet of paper, our backdrop. Then at the top of the layer stack, we've got our subject, which has been cut out with the pen tool nice and accurately and transformed to true it up and get it all nice and square. And then we've got our shadow, which just adds that finishing touch to ground the subject and give it quite a nice finish, which is the kind of thing you might see in a lens catalogue. So the prime tool in doing all of this was that wonderful pen tool, and because the pen tool can create curves and straight lines and be fully adjustable, that's why it's the tool of choice for doing these kind of cutouts if you have the glorious task of creating whiteout pack shots ahead of you. Alright, well I hope that was useful. Just remember, when you're using the pen tool, the important thing is don't just click. What you do is click and drag, and then you can get those curves, and just moving the mouse around will allow you to adjust the way the curve flows. And if you get into the habit, whenever you make a path with the pen tool, just drag a little bit each time and you get that nice curved effect, which allows you to pretty much trace around absolutely anything. And once you've made your strange curved shape and you've outlined your subject, just right click and then choose Make Selection, use half a pixel, and you have a nice curve selection that follows any shape you want to create. Alright then, well thanks for watching, hope that was useful. I understand it was a bit technical with all the layers being formed and things, but watch it through another time and give it a try. Just use a simple subject, make a cutout with the pen tool, and you'll see how easy it all is. Alright, thanks for watching, I'll see you next time.